Hello and welcome to Polar Bear International's Tundra Connection series. I'm Kyle Schutt with Discovery Education, the partner on today's program, and I'm honored to be your host. We're so excited that you've chosen to learn with us today, and the team at Polar Bears International could not be more thrilled to be back in Churchill, Manitoba to teach and discuss how people and polar bears can live in the same place. Now, if this is your first time joining one of these virtual field trips, it will last about 35 minutes, and we have a lot in store to show to you today. So we definitely want to include time for questions, answers, and even shout-outs. So teachers, are you listening? If you're on the Polar Bears International website, one way that you can go ahead and participate with us is in the chat window. So go ahead and find that chat window and type in your questions. But if you're not there and you're viewing it on the Discovery Education page or somewhere else, you can, of course, use Twitter and tweet to @PolarBears and @DiscoveryEd using the Tundra Connections hashtag, and we'll be picking those questions up, those comments up, maybe even some of your photos. We love to see where you're learning, whether it's a classroom or a kitchen table. What does your learning space look like? So this is a global shared learning experience, really. I mean, we have students and schools and classrooms from across North America, over, I think it's 49 states, last I checked, across all of Canada, and even a large international representation from classrooms in Thailand and Albania and Sri Lanka, Jamaica, the Philippines, Australia, India, so many others. So we're really, really excited that all of you have taken the time to join with us today and learn together. Now, Tundra Buggy 1, I mentioned that earlier. That's the roving polar bear production studio, and it's out on the shores of the Hudson Bay right now, and that's where the fabulous Polar Bears International team is, and that's where that polar bear is, because that is live right there. And we're so excited that we can highlight this live polar bear footage to you today. That bear is just outside Tundra Buggy 1, and he's just, take a little nap, take a little snooze, and we can't wait to learn so much about him and all the other bears that are in the region. So with that, joining me today are BJ Kirchhofer and Elisa McCall from Polar Bears International, excuse me, tongue twister. Elisa, can you go ahead and start by introducing yourself and telling the students out there your role with Polar Bears International?
Hi, everybody. So I am Elisa, and I'm one of the staff scientists at Polar Bears International, and I'm also the director of our outreach program. So I help bring Tundra Connections to you, along with my colleague, BJ.
I'm BJ Kirchhofer, and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International. My job is super fun because I get to spend a lot of time researching polar bears, but I also get to work on the education programs here from our little mobile classroom on Buggy 1.
Yeah.
Excellent, thanks guys. Well, we're already getting comments and questions and posts. In fact, Reach Cyber Charter School. Hi guys, we see you, we know you're with us. The third graders are so pumped to be learning with us today, and we are so glad that you're here. So one of the things that to me is just so exciting is that you're back. I know there's a little bit of a hiatus, but I'd love for you to share with the team a little bit about Churchill and where you are, and why it is that every fall you have the opportunity to be there talking about sea ice. So Lisa, could you go ahead and do that for us?
Yeah, so right now we are seeing polar bears on land, which isn't really where polar bears want to be. Polar bears prefer to be out on the Arctic sea ice hunting their favorite food, seals. But where we are in Hudson Bay in Canada, there's no sea ice in the summer. So the bears all come on shore and they wait. But as we head into winter and temperatures are getting colder and we finally get a bit of snow, the sea ice is going to be forming again soon, and the bears know it. So they're starting to gather here along the shores of Hudson Bay, and we know they'll be here, so we know where we go to watch the polar bears. It's a really special place in the world to view polar bears and to bring them to students like you all around the world.
And that's just fascinating. The students are seeing the image of that polar bear that was live, and of course the location. Where is Churchill? There in northern Canada, and how the ice forms. So students, as you're watching, you'll notice that sea ice is just such a crucial geographical feature that really is the purpose for today's event. And so I think what we'll do today to get started is to learn about those sea ice ecoregions with Dr. Amstrup. He has a lot to share with us, and might have a few questions for you students out there. See who's taking notes and paying attention. Let's go ahead and learn from Dr. Amstrup.
All around the Arctic, polar bears depend on the sea ice. Now, they don't eat ice, but they catch their prey from the surface of the sea ice. Polar bears have a range that's called circumpolar. That means if you looked at the top of the globe, it goes all the way around. But the sea ice isn't the same everywhere. And in 2007, I realized that it's really important for us to figure out how and why the ice is different and why bears might respond differently to it. And I came up with the concept of 4 major ice ecoregions, defined by how the ice forms, how it melts, how it moves according to ocean currents, and then how the polar bears respond. The first of these is what I call the seasonal ice ecoregion. This is the part of the world that includes Hudson Bay and much of eastern Canada. The ice there is composed only of annual ice, and when it melts in the summer, the polar bears are forced ashore. Historically, polar bears were able to do just fine with this environment because most of this region is shallow continental shelf water and very productive. So even if bears were forced ashore for an extended period, they could gain enough weight before that happened that they could survive. They could literally live off the fat of their bodies while they were waiting for the ice to come back. The problem now is that with global warming, the ice is melting sooner and it's forming later in the fall than it used to. This means less time that bears have on the ice to catch seals, more time that they have on land waiting for the ice to come back, and during which time they're essentially food deprived. The seasonal ice ecoregion is one we know a great deal about because when polar bears are on land, they're a little bit easier to study than when they're out on the sea ice. We've gained opportunity to learn how important the sea ice is. But the ice there is very different than in most of the rest of the polar bear range. Rather than seasonal ice, the ice in the other 3 regions is multi-year or perennial ice. And that means that a big component of it remained through the summer, and historically bears could stay on that ice, continuing to feed, reaching their peak weights in the fall instead of in the spring as they do in the seasonal ice ecoregion. From Alaska all the way around the Russian Arctic to the Svalbard archipelago north of Norway is the divergent ice ecoregion. Ice tends to form along the shoreline, and then it drifts away from the shoreline out into the center of the polar basin. Some of it actually is ejected from the polar basin. But the important point is that during the summer, this concept of the ice moving with the currents away from the shore means that the ice is always trying to open up and create a gap between the shoreline and the sea ice. Now, this didn't used to be a problem because when the world was cooler, the ice never retreated very far. In fact, when I went to Alaska in the early 1980s, I could stand on the North Shore in the summertime and see the ice right there. If I was lucky and had a pair of binoculars, I might even see a polar bear out there within view of the shoreline. Now that sea ice is way offshore, and that has forced polar bears into a similar challenge that they have faced in the seasonal ice ecoregion. They either have to come onto land where there's nothing for them to eat, or they follow the sea ice way out into the polar basin. And our recent studies have shown that they're not feeding when they're out there either because the water in the deep polar basin is not very productive. Now, the ice from the divergent ice ecoregion is moving from shore out into the polar basin, but a lot of it piles up against the shoreline in northern Canada and also in northern Greenland. I called that area the convergent ice. The divergent ice ecoregion is kind of supplying ice to the convergent ice ecoregion. In the convergent ice ecoregion, polar bears historically didn't come ashore either. And the way the ice moves, even as the world has warmed, most of this area has remained good polar bear habitat throughout the summer because the ice is continually drifting against the shoreline there. The 4th ecoregion is the archipelago ecoregion, composed of the narrow channels of water between the high Canadian Arctic islands. They're very far north, very cold, and even with global warming, ice has persisted through this area for most of the summer, and polar bears don't have to come ashore. If we allow the world to continue to warm and don't do anything about it, the last places that polar bears are likely to be is in the top of the divergent ice ecoregion and in the archipelago ecoregion. But one thing we have to remember is polar bears are dependent on the sea ice, and if the world continues to warm, ultimately all of the sea ice will be gone, and we won't have polar bears in any of these ecoregions.
Okay, students, so let's see, let's test your knowledge. What did you learn there? Go ahead, have your teachers submit their answers, use the Tundra Connections hashtag or submit them in the chat window. What type of ice is found where Churchill is? Okay, quick recap, there was 4 types of ice that they just talked about. What type of ice is where Churchill is located and where our team there on Tundra Buggy 1 is? That's what I want to know. Go ahead and submit your answers. In the meantime, yes, I will be looking for, let's see, I believe it was the Newtown Elementary School. Looks like maybe you're in a library there. Thank you for joining and watching with us. Mrs. Pelk's room, yep, Biglerville, PA. Hi guys, so glad you're with us. We saw Mrs. Schultzman, I believe, out in Las Vegas. Yes, how awesome is that? Hello to your class. We're so glad that you're with us. So go ahead, type in your answers. I'll come back in just a minute. And I have a question for Alisa and BJ, and that is, we heard about multi-year sea ice. Also, Dr. Amsterdam talked about it as perennial sea ice, and that the regions there were divergent, convergent, and archipelago sea ice. I'm wondering, where do humans live in those regions? And that's kind of a hint to the answer of the question if you're paying close attention. But in those 3 areas, where do humans where do they live is what I should ask.
Yeah, it might seem kind of crazy to some of us that live farther south, but humans actually live throughout the Arctic and experience all those different types of sea ice. So just like polar bears, humans in the Arctic have also gotten used to certain patterns of sea ice where they live.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to my document to see answers. We're getting lots of answers submitted. Who's got it? Kind of scrolling through here. Yep, that's right. Seasonal sea ice. Of course, seasonal, because it is the change of the seasons. That's why that bear is right there on the shore of the Hudson Bay, looking up, saying, you know what, this tree is kind of interesting to look at, but I'd rather there be ice here that I can go out on the bay and hunt for some seals. Now, talk to us a little bit, BJ, because it does look like there's some ice there, and I'm sure the students are wondering, well, why is the bear just sitting there? Why isn't he out on that ice? Why can't he hunt for seals if we're seeing a little bit of ice in the photo there in that live shot?
That's a really good question. And I think this camera here doesn't give you the full view of what's happening outside the window. If we were to zoom out, and maybe at some point this afternoon someone will, but you would see a small pond. This little bear here is sitting next to a willow bush inland, and we're not that far from the coast. The bear can see the open Hudson Bay from where we are. But this ice here, you won't find any seals in it. In fact, it's such a shallow pond, you won't even find any fish here. This one freezes right to the ground. So this bear is just kind of waiting here on shore within sight of the Hudson Bay, hoping that it freezes soon.
Now, how many bears are in the region generally? I'm sure there's no specific way, or maybe there is, and you can talk to that, but generally, how many bears are in that area this time of year as the Hudson Bay is freezing over?
So this area we are in is home to the Western Hudson Bay polar bear subpopulation. It's one of 19 different subpopulations of polar bears around the world. And this subpopulation as a whole has approximately 800 polar bears, but that is spread out all through northern Ontario up into almost Nunavut, just covering most of Manitoba. So we usually think of these bears as Manitoban bears ultimately. And so that's about 800 spread out. So in Churchill here, we might see maybe a few dozen a season. There might be more in the larger area, but we're just getting a proportion of that subpopulation. But we can definitely see a great number of polar bears. I think there's been 9 or 10 hanging out right where we are right now in the last few days.
Wow. Okay. So Elisa, sticking with that trend there, talking about the bears that are in that area, you had mentioned how humans really, they live throughout the entire Arctic regions. And this, well, it is Polar Bear Week after all. And for Polar Bear Week, I know there's been a lot of conversation around kind of that living with polar bears, right? The potential for human-bear conflict even. And I'm just wondering, you know, what types of strategies, like what happens? How can you prevent or even prepare when you live or even work somewhere where polar bears are kind of roaming around?
Right. A lot of communities all over the Arctic have lived with polar bears for centuries, for their entire history. So they are the experts at managing human polar bear conflict. But it used to be that there wasn't as much of a problem because polar bears could be far away from people out on sea ice for longer periods of time, and people might have to go look for a polar bear. But now we have more settled communities up in the Arctic, and in many areas, polar bears are spending longer times on land due to climate change. And when you have bears on land for longer and they're a bit hungrier, then they might start seeking out human communities more often than they used to, looking for food, being interested in smells. And so there's a few different ways that those folks can manage polar bears, and it's going to completely depend on the community and on their own knowledge and skills and environment. But a couple really basic things that we can all do no matter what type of bears we live around is better waste management. We can take care of our garbage because it's such an attractant to bears. Bears have amazing senses of smell. They love sniffing out interesting things. So if we can lock up that stuff that might smell kind of funky, it might smell gross to us, but it's pretty interesting to a bear. If we can have bear-proof garbage bins and keep our food kind of tucked away out of reach, that is a major way to help prevent more human polar bear conflict.
Thank you. And I'm seeing a lot of questions and comments about technology. And so a couple more shout outs here. Miss Appel's third graders, Lake Spokane Elementary near Spokane, Washington. Thank you so much for joining us. We have, let's see here, a class from the Oregon coast. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. Mrs. Sand's fourth grade class from Maine, near Brigton, Maine. I hope I'm pronouncing these correct, but you know we love you either way. McSweeney Elementary students from California are joining us. So students, while you're listening, we're so glad that you're joining us. If you're just jumping in right now, you can see that bear kind of wandering around on the tundra. That's live right outside of where BJ and Elisa are talking to us from. They're on the tundra, the roving tundra buggy. Of course, that's a piece of technology, that tundra buggy, that allows them to safely be there documenting what the bears are doing. But there are also other ways that they can understand what bears are doing. In fact, they can track bears. And so that's something that we're going to take a look at here, because who knows, maybe this bear here has a tracker on it. We're not quite sure, but let's go ahead and learn about an interesting partnership that I believe, BJ, you were a pretty integral part in that really helped you to understand how you can better come up with tracking devices for polar bears.
Polar bears are one of the most difficult animals to tag and track, given where they live. Bears are tough, they're rough and tumble. Males are sparring with each other, and so keeping things attached to bears is particularly hard. So we're often asked, why do you tag and track polar bears or wildlife in general? Tracking gives us a ton of information on habitat use, where animals go and what they're doing when we can't see them. An animal like a polar bear, most of their life history occurs out of sight. They live in very remote places, out on the sea ice where it's quite difficult to get to and nearly impossible to get to in the dark winter months. Having devices that remotely give us information on what a polar bear or other wildlife might be doing is incredibly valuable.
The challenge came to us through my son. My son works for Polar Bears International, and he reached out to me one day and he's going, "Dad, we have a problem. We need to attach a tag to a polar bear. You work for a company that makes things stick. Can you help us make a tag stick to a bear?"
Recently, tags and transmitters for bear research or research in general on animals have been shrunk down. They're quite small now. We really need a better tool in order to attach these to the animal itself. Polar Bears International is working with 3M to work and look at, is there better adhesives, maybe some sort of Velcro-like tool, or maybe a tape that could adhere this to the animal for a short amount of time. And then when the tag has outlived itself, the adhesive will simply let go and the tag will be released from the animal.
From there, I turned around and went to our tech forum community. I said, can we figure out a way to do this? I put together an event we called the Tagabear Challenge. It was a creative event to invite people for a couple of days to brainstorm and come up with some solutions.
Here's a polar bear pelt. This is when they molt. This is how long we need this little tag to stick to the bear. Now, what can you guys do?
And then from there, we went into solving those problems, developing test methodologies, and it's been about a 2-year process. Over that time, we came up with several solutions, and we've reduced it down to essentially 4 methodologies. Some of them are adhesive methodologies, some are mechanical methodologies, and some are hybrids of both of those.
Everything we know right now about polar bears is from adult female movements. So we're missing a big chunk of the information on how other bears use habitat, how other bears move around in the subpopulation and potentially between subpopulations. So if we're successful in testing these fur tags, if they work on polar bears, it will allow us for the first time to track adult male polar bears and subadult polar bears. These tags could potentially go on bears of any size. So this will give us a lot more information on polar bear life history, and it'll really round out what we know about polar bear habitat use and how things are changing as sea ice continues to melt.
This has really been a demonstration of the best of 3M. It's what has been really exciting for me about my career here. It's a challenge that I put out to the technical community, and there are a group of folks that have embraced this and have helped to come up with solutions and are just as excited about it as I am. The intent is to provide the wildlife community with a platform for attaching tags, radio tags, to these animals and be able to track them.
Arctic and polar bears provide for some really interesting challenges and unanswered questions. I'm excited to look for new ways to use this tool to try to fill in some of the gaps and provide answers to some of those questions.
Pretty impressive. And BJ, I'd love for you to speak to this, because just from my own experience, having the privilege to be in Churchill previously, I know some of the bear tags and frankly the bear collars were so big, and they could only be on, was it female bears, right? It was pretty tough, if I recall, to get a collar on a male bear. So for the students that have no kind of experience with the history of trying to tag or to follow and track polar bears, can you speak to how this work is going and just some of the outcomes that you're seeing?
Yeah, this is a super exciting project. I think on a personal side, being able to work with my dad to kind of bring something out that might have a positive impact on polar bears was very special. He's super excited about it. So that was really neat. But also, like Kyle mentions, we can only currently put collars or transmitters in general on female polar bears. Male polar bears have a big fat neck and then a smaller head. It's not a small head, but a little bit smaller. So those collars just slide right off. And so we want to know where the guys are going when they go out there. Maybe subadult bears. We can't call it those animals because they're growing too quickly, and we don't want the collar to get too small. So this opens up a whole new population, or part of the population of the polar bears that we can study. This also shrinks the size of the transmitters and the package that the bear has to carry around. And lastly, it's kind of a little bit more annual for the bear. The whole design of this is that the bear, or the thought is that the bear will shed this collar, or this transmitter, these small transmitters, when they molt in the spring. And so we can put these things on the bear in the fall time, and in the spring, when they shed their coat, the transmitter falls off. So this is a really neat little project here that's just kind of, it feels like it's just a little bit more in kind of touch with nature.
And speaking of being in touch with nature, Elisa, can you just comment a little bit? I know we are getting questions right now about this bear and what it's doing. I mean, it seems really cute, although I wouldn't want to be close to it. Pretty hungry bear too, probably. But what's going on? Why is it in the brambles? It's kind of chewing on the trees. Can you speak to what's happening?
Yeah, it's hard for us to know for sure, but I think he's just playing. You know, this bear has been stuck on land since about June. Very bored, wants to get out there and have a meal of seal in the sea ice, but doesn't have the opportunity. Probably a little happy today that there's some fresh snow and hanging out by a bush, just kind of trying something new. So we often do see polar bears kind of playing out here. It's a good way to spend the time. They're kind of stuck here and not a lot of places to go, so use what you've got. And he's been having a good time.
I'm certainly going to give a shout out to that bear for helping us out on our broadcast and just, you know, rolling around and looking so cute. That's
Very
pretty
funny.
cool. Now, while he's doing that, a couple transitions and questions here. I know that, you know, the tagging technology is really fascinating, but there are other technologies like radar that I'd love to learn and have the students learn a little bit more about, specifically because they're really non-invasive forms of research. So before we watch a little bit about that, BJ, what can you tell us? Do you have radar out there on Buggy 1? What kind of technologies are on Buggy 1?
Yeah, so the transmitters, the Burr on Fur project that we just learned about there, that's for animals that we can get our hands on. We can put this transmitter on. And, you know, a couple times a day, the little transmitter tells us where the bear is. Not every bear out here has a transmitter on it. And it would be unrealistic to think that we would do something like that. So radar tracks things or has the ability to track things that don't have transmitters, just movement on the tundra. So like this little bear out here, as it's rolling around, that could register on the radar and tell us that there's an animal out there. For us, of course, we can see that right now on the buggy, so it's not that big of a deal. But if you think about it, here in the Arctic, believe it or not, it gets very dark in the wintertime. Some places there's no sunlight at all, and some places there's a few hours every day. The snow can also be blowing here, and so if you lived in a community and maybe you wanted to know that it's safe for kids to walk to school in the morning, or you want to go out and get some groceries or whatever is your normal activity, tools like this could help provide information to resource managers or the general community that, hey, there's some movement out there, maybe we should go check it out.
Absolutely, that's pretty awesome. So I think we have just a quick little 1-minute video. Let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about some of those other projects dealing with radar that you and the team have been working on.
Around the Arctic, we're seeing more polar bears spend more time on shore and for longer periods of time. And it's setting up sort of the perfect storm for polar bear human conflict. Some of the new projects we have going on, which we're really excited about, include less invasive methods of monitoring polar bears.
Non-invasive research is really important when you're looking at behavior. If we can put out equipment that does all the work, all the logging, we can remove the human element and observe that animal in its natural environment. We've got a program here that we're piloting in Churchill, Manitoba. We're using a compact surveillance radar to alert authorities when polar bears are coming into a community long before they get to the first house or the first street.
This is a system that can see in the dark and detect polar bears and track their movements as they come along the edge of a community. We really are trying to make sure people who work, play, and live in the North have the information and tools they need to stay safe.
Pretty fascinating. We hope that you're enjoying, specifically Mrs. Norris's class, Valdez, Alaska. Thank you for joining us at Gilson Middle School. Also, Miss Urbe's class, 3rd graders in South Florida. Awesome. So glad that you're with us. Probably a little bit cooler in Wisconsin. Yeah, we have some students in Chippewa Falls that are joining us, New Albany, Indiana. Thank you so much. Sebring, Ohio with Ms. Walsh's class. There are just so many students that are really sharing. In fact, Ms. Goldman's class in Pawtucket, Rhode Island also wanted to shout out. How about Parkside Elementary, Buffalo, Minnesota? Ms. Olson, thank you, thank you, thank you. We're so glad that you're joining us. And that bear is just kind of roaming around. We've been talking about the importance of this bear and why we're in the middle of this migration season and why the bears are there. And so as we think about the technology that can help us, and the compact surveillance radar, the tagging that VJ and his father were talking to. Of course, there are lots of other ways that we can help bears and help people, especially as they're kind of living together. And one of those ways is just through education, right? Through outreach and education. In fact, Elisa, I know you had the chance to do a little bit of a walkthrough at your brand new interpretive center, the Polar Bear House. And that's just another example of one way that your team's able to just help a little bit in talking about polar bears and enabling any visitor to learn about polar bears. So let's go ahead. I'd love to watch that, and then Elisa, come back to you and learn more about what other strategies and what other things can we do less technological to both help bears and to help humans that live in this area.
Hi, I'm Elisa with Polar Bears International, and here is Polar Bears International House. This is the space that visitors in Churchill get to come visit us at. At Polar Bears International, we host people at Polar Bears International House to teach them more about Arctic sea ice and polar bears. We have a couple really cool installations to explain to people why polar bears need Arctic sea ice. We have a food web here. You can see this acts as our sea ice and forms the base of the food chain with the small creatures that feed the fish, that feed the seals, that feed the polar bears. The Arctic ecosystem is a vast place, and the polar bear is a vast bear. See how big this bear is? This would be an adult male polar bear, and he's way bigger than I am. They are huge, and that's because they eat seals, and seal blubber gives them enough calories to get really big and thrive across the Arctic. Down here, you'll see a map of the different areas of the Arctic that polar bears live in. Each different color is a different sea ice ecoregion. Different types of sea ice are around the Arctic. And this wall here is showing us how long these polar bears have been on land for. In this area of the Arctic, they come on land in the summer. That's why they're here in the fall right now and how we can watch them. But pretty soon, the Arctic sea ice will freeze up on Hudson Bay and the polar bears will leave. This chart is helping us count how long polar bears have been on land for. Over here, we can show visitors different videos and our Lego Tundra Buggy 1. Please consider voting for our Lego Tundra Buggy 1 online so you too can have your own kit at home. It is so much fun. We have a prop cart and we have a big TV for more shows and to talk to students like you. Thank you so much for joining our very short tour of Polar Bears International House. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for doing that, Elisa. But it's a pretty neat space. I especially love the size when you're standing there next to that polar bear, just to give a little bit of perspective, because we're getting a lot of questions about that, and that's what we're going to jump into is some Q&A. But before we do that, what other strategies, what can you talk to us about as far as how to help, both help polar bears and then help the people that live in these areas?
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, Kyle, education is such a huge part. Again, the people that already live here have a pretty good sense of how to deal with polar bears, but things are changing and more tourists are coming up north than ever. So even kind of common sense things like don't go out by yourself at night, be very aware of your surroundings. We also encourage people, if you're old enough and you have the opportunity to carry bear spray with you, we are big proponents of bear spray. It has been shown to be very effective against polar bears. So we all carry bear spray when we're walking around town. People also have a lot of dogs in the north that can act as kind of alert signals amongst many other things like companionship, but dogs are a good warning. And Churchill itself is really special. There's a lot of other resources for polar bear safety, and we actually have patrols in Churchill that are always looking for polar bears and watching, and other communities may not necessarily have that, but they might have someone designated in their community to kind of be the polar bear monitor and keep an eye out. So there are a lot of different things, but teaching people about how to be safe around polar bears if they don't know how is something that is very important and increasingly important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And so speaking of questions, there's just so many coming in. I'm wondering if we can just do a quick rapid Q&A session here before we wrap for the day. A couple questions just around the temperature, where you are right now. They can see that it's snowing. That bear's kind of hiding now. Can you see? Look closely, guys. He's camouflaged back there in the back of the wood. But can you speak to the temperature there? why bears have fur and a little bit about their fur. And then there was one more question just about what do the bears eat? I know we covered that a little bit, but BJ, can you go through those three real quick for us? The temperature outside, why the bears are there, and what they eat.
Sure, so we can hammer through them real quick. Also, happy to see Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin on there. We used to stop in Chippewa on the way to Grandma's house. She's in Wausau, Wisconsin, not far away. Anyways, temperatures here should be colder. It's been very mild. It's been a very mild fall, so we're hovering around freezing, kind of day and night. So 32 degrees for those south of the border. Up here, it's 0 C, so not that cold. Why are bears here? Remember, this is the seasonal ice ecoregion. We learned that earlier today. All of Hudson Bay melts every single summer. It has done that for a very long time, and bears have learned they need to come on shore and then wait it out. Once the bay freezes again, they can go out and get their favorite food, seals. And then their fur. Polar bears, of course, have fur for multiple reasons. One is camouflage. The white fur helps them blend in, so seals can't see them. Oh, we have a little chunk here. It provides a little bit of insulation because it can get very, very cold in the Arctic. And, what's that?
Oh, just so they can see it.
Oh, you can see it. Sorry. Yep. And what else do they have fur? I mean, it's just nice, you know?
Yeah, keeps them warm when it's freezing cold outside. Yeah, but it's not actually white. Yeah, it's the clear fur.
It's clear fur.
Yeah, it just looks white.
It just looks white to the eye.
Yeah.
That's
How's
awesome.
that
In fact, you're answering other questions, which is great. And Elisa, back to you. There are a lot of questions about the seals. I know you mentioned when you were in the polar bear house how there was a tracker for how many days since the polar bears have been on the ice. And of course, that means that's really basically how many days since they've probably had their last meal. So lots of questions around how often do they eat? How many seals do they eat? How much in a day? Can you speak to their diet a little bit?
Yeah, polar bear diets are very seasonal. So at this time of year when polar bears on land, they aren't getting anything substantial to eat. But they are still bears. They will chew on seaweed, on berries, on eggs if they can. But that's kind of like us trying to live off of Halloween candy or something. It's something kind of fun to chew, but it's not going to sustain us long term. So polar bears really do need to get out on that sea ice to hunt seals because blubber is their #1 food. And that is because blubber is the most energetically dense food we can find on the planet, basically. And if you imagine a polar bear, the biggest bear species, the most mobile, they walk more than any other four-legged animal. They have a lot of energetic requirements. They need to eat a lot of food, and blubber fills that need for them. There's no other food on land that has enough energy like blubber for polar bears. So when they're out on the ice in the winter, they're eating approximately 1 seal a week to keep going, depending on the type of seal. But in the springtime is the best time to be a polar bear because that is when the seals are having their babies. And seal babies are very plump and they're not very smart. So they're easy hunting for polar bears. And so polar bears in the spring are going to eat a ton of food, and we call it hyperphagia, which basically means lots of eating. And that's when polar bears can gain hundreds of pounds of body weight in just a few short months. In fact, they can eat over 100 pounds of blubber in one sitting. At one meal, that's crazy.
That's
so
crazy.
polar bears really are blubber machines.
That is so fascinating. Like just thinking about that, I'm a little bit full thinking about that, to be honest. But of course, that's how they've evolved. So that's pretty interesting science there. Elisa, I'd love for you to just share any final words as we're coming to a close here. Knowing that it's been a couple of years since you've been able to be back in Churchill, just what is your experience like? If a student asked you, lots of those questions, what's it like to truly be there where a polar bear is out the window? Any last words, and can you share, just what that feels like for you?
Yeah, it has been absolutely incredible to be back. It's been a couple years since I was able to be here at this time of year and to see the polar bears again. We've been seeing moms with cubs. We've seen some sparring, which is like polar bear play fighting. And to see the snow today and this bear rolling around and playing with the willow, it just fills my soul with happiness and is inspiring us to keep doing what we're doing when we get to reconnect with the polar bears. So I'm just so thrilled to be on here on Buggy One with the polar bears and with you.
Well, we're definitely honored. BJ, what about yourself? There's so many interesting projects in the works there. Any last words or things that you'd like to share with the students?
You know, it's really fun to be able to do that kind of work, but I think it's even more important that we can come on this platform and share that with you so that we can maybe inspire you to come give us a hand once you finish up your schooling. Because it really is, it takes folks that are excited about this stuff to keep pushing it along.
Absolutely, and there are a number of partners that are helping, right? Frontiers North, I know, contributes a whole lot just for you to be on the buggy. Is there anyone like that you'd like to thank?
Yeah, absolutely. So Frontiers North Adventures provides us with Tundra Buggy One. It allows us to be able to drive around and stream these bears and conduct this program. So we really appreciate their support here. And there's many other sponsors as well that just keep moving Polar Bears International helps fund PBI. So come to our website, come check it out. And it really is a team effort here from the science end all the way on to the funding end to make all of this stuff work.
Absolutely. And we want to thank you, of course, all of the students out there that are learning with us. As you can tell, we couldn't possibly answer all of your questions or we'd be here on all day long. However, there's good news, of course. There's more Tundra Connections broadcasts coming to you from the team there at Polar Bears International throughout this season. Of course, you'll be able to watch this archive, and hopefully we just really want you to want to learn more, to take that next step. Go learn more. What's the one thing you heard today that you think, I need to know more about that? Go use your library, right? Go find out more. Continue being curious, right? Because there's so much more that you can learn. So saying that, teachers, those of you that are using Discovery Education, of course, there are lesson activities, background builders, choice boards. There's so many more instructional resources that you can use after this event. Polar Bears International, their website has an entire education center dedicated to learning about polar bears. So use that. And we really want to ask you to take the feedback survey. Your input helps us to improve our programming. So once you complete that survey, which we know you'll help us out and do so, you'll also be entered to win a polar bear adoption. So that's pretty cool. There's so many new free educational materials on the website. There's a Flipgrid. There's so many ways that you can explore and kind of follow that curiosity. So please go ahead and do so just today. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of Discovery Education, Polar Bears International is just such an incredible partner to work with. We're so happy they invited us once again on this inspirational Arctic adventure. So continue to follow your curiosity, use those explore.org websites and cameras, continue to actively learn, find out about the world around you, right? There's just so much that we can do. So thank you to our sponsors, stay curious. We will see you next time. Thank you for learning with us, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. We hope you leave here feeling inspired and return home to leverage your voice and your influence. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.